Tonight, let me tell you a story about an emperor, a palace of shining beauty, and a small grey bird whose song held more truth than all the treasures of the world. It is an old fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, but like many old tales, it still speaks softly to the heart, because sometimes what is simple is also what is most precious, and sometimes the most beautiful thing in the world cannot be owned, polished, or placed on display. So settle in now, take a slow breath, let the noise of the day drift farther away, and listen to the gentle story of the nightingale. Long ago, in the faraway land of China, there lived an emperor whose palace was the most splendid in all the world. Its walls gleamed like porcelain, its towers caught the morning light and shimmered like pearls. The floors were smooth and cool, the halls wide and quiet, and the gardens beyond seemed to stretch forever. In those gardens, delicate flowers bloomed in careful patterns. Silver bells hung from their stems, and when the wind passed through, they rang so softly that one could barely tell whether the sound came from the flowers or from a dream. Beyond the emperor's gardens lay a great forest, deep and green and filled with shadows. And beyond the forest was the sea, where ships passed close to the shore. Travellers from distant lands came to admire the emperor's palace, the gardens, the order, the beauty of it all. But when they returned home and spoke of what they had seen, there was one thing they always praised above every jewel, every tower, every blossom. They spoke of the nightingale. The little bird lived in the forest near the sea. It was plain in appearance, a small grey bird that no one would have noticed twice if they had only seen it with their eyes. But when it sang, even the fishermen paused in their work. Sometimes in the evening, a poor fisherman rowing home after a long day would hear that song drifting through the trees, and he would stop, forgetting for a moment his tired hands, his empty net, and the heaviness of life. "How beautiful it is," he would whisper, listening in the dark. The bird's voice was clear and gentle, and yet so full of feeling that those who heard it often found themselves strangely quiet, as though it had sung directly into the secret chambers of the heart. One day, the emperor was sitting in his palace, reading a great book sent from another country. It was filled with praise for the wonders of his kingdom. He read of his splendid halls. He read of his graceful gardens. He read of his great power and majesty. And then he came to a passage that said, "The most wonderful thing in the emperor's whole realm is the nightingale." The emperor sat up straight. "The nightingale?" he said. "I have never heard of such a bird." He turned the page again and read more of its song, and the more he read, the more displeased he became. How could there be something in his own empire, praised by all the world, that he had never seen, never heard, never been told about? At once he called his servants. His chief courtier came hurrying in, bowing low. "What is this nightingale?" asked the emperor. "I read that it is the finest wonder in all my kingdom. Why have I not been told of it?" The courtier was troubled. He had never heard of the bird either. "I do not know, your majesty," he said carefully. "Perhaps it has never been properly presented at court." "Then it must be presented tonight," said the emperor. "I wish to hear it with my own ears." And so the court was thrown into great confusion. Servants hurried through the halls whispering. Messengers ran through the gardens. Officials nodded wisely, pretending they knew exactly what was meant, though in truth they did not. Everyone was afraid to admit ignorance. So they searched, They asked one another in hushed voices, "What is a nightingale? Where is it? Who has seen it?" But no one at court seemed to know. At last, in the palace kitchens where the dishes clattered and steam rose warm into the air, a poor little kitchen maid looked up and said quietly, "I know the nightingale." All the great officials turned to stare at her. "You know it?" asked the chief courtier. "Yes," she said. "Every evening when my work is done, I go to visit my sick mother who lives near the shore. On the way back, I rest in the forest. Then I hear the nightingale sing, and whenever it sings, I feel as though tears come into my eyes. It is as if my mother were kissing me." The courtier was amazed. "You must lead us to it at once," he said. And so, that evening, an unusual procession left the palace. Fine ladies in silk slippers, great lords with embroidered sleeves, attendants with lanterns, pages, courtiers, and the chief courtier himself, all followed the little kitchen maid out through the gardens and toward the forest. As they walked, the evening grew dim and soft. The air smelled of leaves and damp earth, and the sounds of the palace faded behind them. Soon they heard a cow lowing in the distance. "There!" cried one of the courtiers. "How powerful! Surely that must be the nightingale." The kitchen maid smiled gently. "No," she said, "that is only a cow." A little farther on, frogs began croaking from a marsh. "How marvellous!" whispered another courtier. "Such deep tones, so full of mystery. That must certainly be the bird." But the kitchen maid shook her head. "No," she said again, "those are frogs." The grand people of the court were growing a little embarrassed, but they walked on. Then, at last, from deep among the trees, there came a sound so delicate and beautiful that everyone stopped at once. It was a song unlike any they had ever heard. It was simple, but not plain, tender, but not weak. It seemed to move like clear water over stones, then rise like moonlight through branches, then soften again into something that made the heart ache without knowing why. "That is the nightingale," whispered the kitchen maid. On a branch above them sat a small grey bird. The courtiers blinked. "Is that all?" one of them murmured. It seemed impossible that such a plain little creature could produce such a voice. But the bird sang on, and even the chief courtier, who was usually too dignified for strong feelings, found himself deeply moved. "Little nightingale," he said, bowing in the direction of the branch, "our most gracious emperor wishes you to come to the palace tonight and sing before him." The nightingale tilted its small head. "I sing best in the forest," it said. But the kitchen maid stepped forward kindly, and the bird, hearing the sincerity in her voice, agreed to come. So the whole procession returned to the palace with the little grey bird. That night the grand hall was prepared. Golden lamps were lit in long rows. Rich curtains hung from the high walls. The finest nobles stood in shining garments. The emperor sat upon his throne, splendid and still, waiting. The nightingale was given a small golden perch beside him, and then the bird began to sing. At the first note, the great hall seemed to change. It no longer felt cold and glittering, but warm and alive. The emperor listened. The courtiers listened. The lamps flickered softly. The song rose and fell with such sweetness that tears came to the emperor's eyes. And when the nightingale saw those tears, it sang even more beautifully than before. For there is no reward sweeter to a true singer than a heart that has been touched. The emperor was so moved that he declared the bird should remain at court forever. He wished to reward it with a golden slipper tied around its neck, but the nightingale answered gently, "I have already been rewarded enough. I saw tears in the emperor's eyes, and that is treasure enough for me." From that day on, the nightingale became the wonder of the palace. It had its own golden perch, its own attendants, and even a title. The court admired it greatly, though some admired it more because others did than because they understood its song. The ladies of the court tried to imitate its voice, trilling softly and speaking in sweet little tones. The servants discussed it with great seriousness, and everyone said it was the most extraordinary bird in the world. Then one day a gift arrived from the Emperor of Japan. It came in a beautiful box covered with jewels. When the box was opened, everyone gasped. Inside was an artificial bird. It looked like a nightingale, but it was made of gold and enamel, and its body was studded with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. When it was wound with a key, it sang a little tune and lifted its tail, which glittered in the light. A tiny ribbon around its neck bore a message. The nightingale of the Emperor of Japan is poor compared to that of the Emperor of China. The court was enchanted. "How splendid!" they cried. "How elegant! How exact! How bright!" The artificial bird sang its little song once, then again and again. It was always the same tune, always perfect, always predictable. The court musicians were delighted because now they could understand it completely. "Yes," they said, nodding wisely, "this is a most scientific bird." Soon the artificial bird and the real nightingale were asked to sing together. But it did not go well. The real nightingale sang in its own way, living and free, while the jewelled bird repeated its polished melody. "It is not the same kind of music," said the music master. And before long, the court began to prefer the artificial bird. It was shiny. It was rare. It could be explained. It never changed unexpectedly. It always performed exactly as it had the day before. And one evening, while the court was admiring the jewelled bird, the real nightingale quietly flew out through the open window and disappeared into the dark forest beyond. When the bird was discovered to be gone, the court was shocked. Some were offended, some were disappointed, some said it was ungrateful. The emperor himself was displeased. To leave the palace, to leave after being shown such honour, it seemed a terrible insult. So the artificial bird was raised to even greater importance. It was placed on silk cushions. It was shown to visitors. It was praised in speeches. Books were written about it. The music master delivered long explanations of why it was superior in every way. After all, he said, one could count the notes of the artificial bird. One could study it. One could explain its mechanism. One could know exactly what it would do. As for the real bird, who could say? It sang according to its heart, and hearts were difficult things to measure. So the artificial bird became the court favourite. It sang its tune many times a day, and even more often in private for the emperor, who had grown used to hearing it. Years passed. The emperor grew older, and one night the jewelled bird, after singing its little melody again and again, suddenly made a strange clicking sound. Then something inside it snapped. The music stopped. The court musicians were summoned at once. They opened the bird carefully and examined its wheels and springs. At last, they announced that the damage was serious. The bird could be repaired, but it must be used only rarely. Its delicate mechanism had worn down, and some of the parts could not easily be replaced. From then on, the bird sang only once a year. The emperor listened to it less and less, and in time he became ill. It was a grave illness, the kind that enters quietly and then grows heavier with each passing day. Soon he lay pale and weak in his great bed, the curtains drawn around him. The palace had grown so silent that each breath seemed loud. Outside, everyone whispered. A new emperor was already being discussed in secret corridors. Servants moved softly, afraid to meet one another's eyes, and there, beside the sick emperor's bed, sat the silent, artificial bird. It could not sing. No one had wounded it. Even if they had, it might not have worked. The emperor lay awake in the dark, more alone than he had ever been in all his splendid life. Then, as the night deepened, he felt a strange presence. He opened his eyes and saw that death itself seemed to sit upon his chest. Death wore the emperor's golden crown. In one bony hand it held the emperor's sword, in the other his imperial banner. And from the folds of the bed curtains pale faces looked in, faces of the deeds the emperor had done in life. Some were gentle and kind, some were stern, some whispered of forgotten things, some accused, some mourned, and all around the bed the shadows thickened. The emperor trembled. "Music," he whispered. "Music, please. Great golden bird, sing for me. Sing loudly, so I don't have to hear these voices." But the artificial bird remained still. There was no one to wind it, and even if there had been, it had no song for such a night. The emperor felt colder and colder. Then, through the open window, there came a sound. Soft at first, then clearer. A living song. It was the nightingale. It had heard that the emperor was dying, and it had flown from the forest to sing to him in the darkness. Its voice filled the room like cool air after suffocating heat. It sang of quiet woods, of moonlight on water, of rest, of hope, of sorrow made gentle. It sang so beautifully that the fearful faces around the bed faded back into the curtains. The room seemed less dark. Death listened, and while it listened, it grew still. "Sing again, little nightingale," said Death. And the nightingale sang again. This time it sang of peaceful churchyards where white roses grow, where elder trees bend in the evening breeze, where tears fall softly on the grass and are changed into something tender. It sang of the sadness that belongs to all living things, and of the beauty that somehow lives beside it. And as the nightingale sang, death began to loosen its hold. The emperor felt the terrible weight on his chest grow lighter. The cold receded. The air seemed to move once more. "Thank you," whispered Death to the bird at last. "You have given me beautiful songs." And slowly, like a pale mist drifting away at dawn, Death left through the window. The emperor lay weak and silent. The nightingale continued singing, softly now, until colour began to return to his face. By morning, the emperor was no longer dying. When the first light entered the room, he opened his eyes fully and saw the little grey bird still perched beside the window. "Thank you," said the emperor, his voice trembling. "You heavenly little bird. I drove you away, and yet you came back to sing life into me. How shall I reward you?" "You have rewarded me already," said the nightingale. "The first time I sang for you, I brought tears to your eyes. I never forgot that. And tonight I have sung to your heart again. That is enough." The emperor was deeply humbled. Never before had he felt so clearly the difference between what glittered and what was true. "Stay with me always," he said. "Remain in my palace, and I shall honour you above all things." But the nightingale shook its small head. "No," it said gently, "I do not belong in cages, even beautiful ones. I love your forest, your lakes, the poor fishermen, the quiet evening branches, but I will come to you when I choose. Then it flew to the windowsill and continued, I will sing to you of what is hidden from those who hear only praise. I will sing to you of the happiness of humble homes, of sorrow in distant streets, of goodness that asks for no reward, of grief that wears no crown. I will bring you truth in song. The emperor listened in silence. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that truth is not always found in splendid halls, and that love cannot be commanded like a servant. But no one must know that you come and go freely, said the nightingale. Let it remain our secret. I promise, said the emperor, and he kept his promise. The little artificial bird was not thrown away. The emperor could not bring himself to destroy it. It had once given him pleasure in its own manner, even if it had no living soul within it. So it remained, polished and admired from afar, but the emperor no longer mistook it for something greater than it was. And as for the nightingale, sometimes it sang from a branch outside the palace window, sometimes from the forest, sometimes from a place where no one could see it at all. Yet whenever it sang, the emperor listened, and he became wiser. He listened more carefully to his people. He saw more clearly the sadness and beauty of the world. He ruled with a gentler hand, for he had learned that what is living cannot be replaced by what merely shines. He had learned that the heart recognizes truth even when pride does not, and he had learned that the sweetest songs are often sung by those who ask nothing in return. So ends the story of the nightingale, a tale of a little bird, a mighty emperor, and the quiet difference between what is real and what only appears beautiful. And perhaps tonight, as the world grows still around you, it leaves behind one soft reminder that the truest comfort is often simple, that beauty does not need jewels to be precious, and that sometimes the song that saves us is the one we almost failed to hear. Good night.